bring in former top cop Jeremy Very now. Jeremy, you've written an article where you say you believe we need to revive the police units dedicated to investigating firearms. But I was just listening to the people that Pule was chatting to. There's a problem of guns and a sense that we are flooded with illegal firearms. Have we lost the war on illegal firearms in this country?
No, I don't believe we've lost the war, but we have eroded our capacity to tackle it in a systematic way through certain police units that were dedicated to do this job in the past at a specialized level, who do not exist anymore. But of late, a few years ago, we've shown a way in which we can revive that kind of way of investigating that takes us to the source, the supply sources of firearms in a very systematic way. And that was in the case of the Prinsloo matter, where through a dedicated efforts of a particular team, combined crime intelligence and detectives, under which I was the project leader, we were able to tackle the smuggling of firearms to gangs right through to its source, where it was initiated, and developed successful racketeering cases against the perpetrators, and they are on trial, and the one was sentenced, Colonel Prinsloo. But what that showed, it is possible through a certain type of investigation methodology, similar to what we used when we had the firearm investigation units, to actually address the problem deeper and beyond just the mere possession of firearm cases.
And am I right, just to jump in, that this is not about calling for tighter laws? The issue is actually those who don't have a gun license because they're carrying an illegal firearm. Am I correct in that assessment?
That is not actually correct. I think our Minister of Police's report on firearms control and management of South Africa in 2016 highlighted, explained to us and accepted that the loss of firearms from civilians and state institutions is the most significant source of illegal firearms in South Africa. So while there is a source of firearms that are primarily preferred, like by cash in transit groups where AK-47s is common, the bulk of the firearms that kill us and maim us in the ghettos are actually firearms that have their origin in once having been licensed firearms and being under control of the state. And I just want to illustrate for an example of the quantities we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. There was 8,630 firearms taken for the financial year, was lost for the financial year 2020-2011. And of that, 8,007 were losses from civilian owners, and about 637 of that from the SAP side. So we're dealing with civilian sources of firearms, in addition to firearms such as AKs that come from across our borders. We're dealing with a glut in our system as far as that. And there's a responsibility of the police on our side to find each one of those firearms, especially the state firearms, because we can be held civilly liable for it, for whatever damage it might cause and lives lost. But there is a need to make a dedicated effort to find that. Now, those firearms, now that will not be found through leaving that on the desk of a station, or even through, I believe, a unit of limited capacity like the Hawks, where it was attempted to have such a capacity before. It has failed to stem and deal with this big, massive problem that we have. So only specialized units of the past, like we had, did have an impact cross provinces where they existed to achieve this.
Did those specialized units work because that was their sole focus? So that speaks about our overburdened police officers. But also, does it speak to the fact that they had the time to get the intelligence on the flow of guns, the big gangs that were moving arms around, that were seizing legal firearms and then keeping them for themselves, that were infiltrating, corrupting police officers, etc., etc. Is it all really boiling down to a group that has the time to get the intelligence on what's happening with the flow of guns?
That is correct. And whether we like it or not, at the scale at which of the problem we deal was as illustrated by the statistics and the duty to retrieve that the return for such a dedicated capacity is necessary, like it was in '96 when we had to deal with firearms that came from multiple of sources and multiple conflicts at the time and intensified gang wars. We are dealing with a similar situation now, and it requires a ring-fenced dedicated capability to deal with that. You know, and the question sometimes arises where the people are going to come from. Let me answer that question clearly. With eNCA, we proved that despite our other work, we could do that. So prioritized command and control, proper prioritization on how you deal with certain crime threats at a certain thing can achieve results if you dedicate resources and dedicate effort to do it in a project investigation methodology like we did.
It sounds interesting. Also, we know that we don't have enough boots on the ground, but I think if you're focused and you give your officers a very clear mandate and there's very clear control, you can make the best of those very scarce resources. I want to just ask you about your assessment and your views of what's been happening with these tavern shootings. The police minister says he doesn't see a specific link, but we have seen in a number of them, it was men armed with AK-47s mowing people down, not taking a thing. Is that the hallmark of a revenge killing, gang killing? Can you glean anything from the style of the shootings?
Insofar as it involves a group of people who are multiply or equally armed and attacking in that way, it has an organized criminal hallmark or feature to it. And that's as far as I'm prepared to speculate. As to the who and what, that not. So the type of actions that we see definitely reflect the type of, or calls out for the type of investigations that would fit within the terrain of our Prevention of Organized Crime Act. So one is hoping that the investigations would move in the direction of utilizing the Act to ensure that people are ultimately charged for whatever is behind this. From a racketeering point of view, and from a gang point of view, if it points towards gang-related crime, as in Chapter 4, as enumerated in Chapter 4 of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. So we have the legislative tools to go after groups of this nature, but once again, it must be done in a dedicated fashion. As far as the firearms are concerned involved, one would hope that the resolution of the case, this would not be one of those cases where people will just merely be charged with the possession of firearms in addition to the murder charges that will be brought. The problem with that is the investigation would not have proceeded to go all down the chain of possession and origin to uncover the trafficking that was involved in the firearms. So when we're dealing with cases of this, of an organized criminal nature, we need really to track firearms right down to the point of how they were trafficked so that we can build strong racketeering charges in the process.
That's
and take more people in the chain of causation and the chain linked to the incident than the people who are merely shooting and did the shooting on the scene.
Yeah, I suppose to see every cartridge as a clue in a way to plug in and find those big networks. Thank you so much. So insightful. Former top cop Jeremy Very saying he believes we need to revive specialised units that look into the flow of firearms in our country.